Welcome to Italics, television for the Italian-American experience. I'm your host, Anthony Tamburri. On this episode of Italics, we welcome Antonio Tibaldi, an award-winning filmmaker and professor of film and video at the City College of New York, who joined us at the Calandra Institute to discuss his latest documentary, Gorgona, Life Inside a One-of-a-Kind Prison in the Middle of the Sea, where men seek redemption through their work. Born in Sydney, Australia, Antonio spent most of his formative years in Europe before studying at the California Institute of the Arts. His work has received numerous awards and has been presented at major international festivals, including Berlin, Sundance, San Sebastian, Rotterdam, IDFA, and Tribeca. Antonio also collaborates as a consultant and videographer with CUNY TV, United Nations Television, producing documentaries that shed light on underreported realities in South and Central America, Africa, and Asia. Antonio, welcome back to Calandra Institute, and welcome to Italics, because you've been here before, and in fact, it was a number of years ago, well before COVID, that we showed your documentary Scomparse,
yes,
which had a wonderful play on words with the scomparse, but also in brackets, and what that word could mean as both as extra, but also those who disappeared, and it was actually about the making of Terraferma by Emanuele Crialese. You're a professor of film, in fact, film production at
Yes.
City College of the City University of New York. Today we're going to talk about Gorgona. What interested you in making this film?
Yeah, it's interesting because what gets you going on a project is a very actually important question, because you need a lot of, especially to make a film like that, a lot of not taking no for an answer, because to shoot inside of a prison, very, very, very difficult. What brought me to make the film was kind of something that happened way, way, way back when I was a kid. So I was about 14 years old, and my brother was a semi-professional sailor, and we were bringing a boat back from Sardinia to Carrara, Marina di Carrara. So if you look on a map, it's straight north, and we're heading north. And it was a beautiful day. It was a Sunday, I remember. It was like 45 knots of wind, a clear sky. And I was actually at the tiller, and it broke. Everybody who goes by sea knows that Gorgona, it's indicated in nautical maps that you can't access because it's a prison island.
Right.
But we had to, ask for permission to check our problem. So we entered the little marina that you see in the film. Yeah. We were the only pleasure boat. It was completely crystal clear water, just amazing. Never seen a water like this in a little harbor. We asked them if we could stay until, the sea would calm. And the policemen, the Polizia Penitenziaria, they said, you stay here, you can't go past this yellow line on the dock. And as soon as the weather, you guys leave. They brought us a bit of dried bread and 2 bottles of water, and that was it. And I remember at night I was there in the pozzetto of little sailboat, and I was looking up the valley, and I saw all these dots. And all these dots were men at work, and I knew they were inmates. And at night, I was having a little bit of a hard time falling asleep, because I was wondering, they could threaten us and just get on the boat, put the engine on, and leave.
Yeah.
All these things you think as a teenager that has read too many Diabolic and too many, too many comic books or whatever I'd read. So that kind of stayed, this memory of Gorgona, because it's pretty unique. Like about 30 years later, I was visiting my father, who was in Tuscany, and there was a big article, it was in June, about Frescobaldi, who had started making wine on the island.
Yeah.
So then I became really curious, said, oh my God, I really have to go back. I tried to go back 3 times as a tourist, because you can go as a day tripper.
Right.
The 3 times the trip was canceled because of mare mosso, which as soon as there's, they don't want to take chances, because if they bring let's say they bring 30 tourists there, the sea gets bad, then they don't have nowhere to put them. So they're very careful. Plus, they were, I realized that later, the administration of the prison island at the time, they were very trying to keep it sealed from the world. So I could never go. So then I said, but I'm still curious. So I came back, I live here in New York, I came back to New York and I wrote a letter, a real letter, not an email. To the Ministerio di Grazia e Giustizia in Rome, asking them for permission to go to the island to do a filmed survey to maybe do a documentary. It was a very vague letter. And I just felt, I get it off my chest. I've done what I could. I tried to go. I wasn't able. 6 months later, I actually received, amongst all the junk mail you get, I received a reply with the timbre. And I opened up and they agreed. So that's how it started. So then I showed up on the island for 10 days with a camera by myself. And it was an incredible experience for me. I said, well, I have to make this film.
Allora, Vincenzo, intanto quando è arrivato,
sabato,
com'è stato il primo impatto?
È stato bello. Per me che ho girato tanti istituti è stato una cosa nuova. Questo è il 28esimo, quindi...
28, ma sempre nella stessa detenzione o...
Nell'altra.
I was wondering, boy, this is an island that's not a prison. It's an island that has a prison on it. And there are moments where you have faraway shots and you wouldn't think it's a prison. It would be almost like a convent, if anything, right? If not a little borgo of a family, of a large family. The other thing I found really curious is that they work and they get paid. They seem to get paid a little bit more than what prisoners might normally get paid. They were talking about 6,000 euros a year, was it? Or something like that, right? Now having a winery there, and the prisoners work for Frescobaldi.
Some of them. Some of the inmates, he hires 2 or 3, he teaches them how to prune, how to harvest, and so forth. He does that, and the wine is actually a good wine. It's a very unique flavor because there's a lot, it receives a lot of the salt from the water.
From the water,
It's very in proximity.
Vermentino, Ansonica e Gorgona.
L'aria, il profumo.
He sells it very expensive. I think he does a good thing because he actually teaches jobs to it's a very specialized job. It's not like, so they learn how to do that. And he has a lot of wineries in Chianti, on the main coast. So sometimes he would hire a few of them when they finish the sentence. So it's a good thing, but it's only for 2 or 3 of them. And there's like you said, there's about 90 inmates.
It's a prison on an island that people really can't visit. And there was one local resident. But yet now there are tours.
Ci sono un bel po' di persone.
Pompa che si è recuperata, rifatta, per cui stare completamente.
What's interesting about Gorgona is that it was a prison island before Italy was a republic.
Ah, okay.
So it's been like this for, since 1869. I mean, it's a tremendous amount of time. It became, in the 70s, 1970s, when the prison reform in Italy, in Europe and in Italy, it became an experiment on a humane type of detention, meaning that you did your time there and you would sleep in cells, but the cells are actually pretty nice.
Well, I thought, wait a second, this guy's got a private bathroom here.
They do have private bathrooms in the cell. They can eat at the mensa, there's one of the inmates who cooks for everybody, but they don't have to. They can also purchase their own food at the spaccio and cook it. They have little kitchenettes. Everybody who wants to can get get a fridge delivered by family members. They count them at lunch, they return into their cells, only to be counted. So they're all in, they rest for an hour, and then they open them again, and then they go.
working,
and it's very casual. I said, I'm going to do I'm going there. I'm going there.
And normally here in the States, one would say, okay, one would look at it without knowing what their crimes were and think, okay, this is a low security prison, right? As we have those here in the States where white collar crime or whatever, non-violent crime. But these guys, some of them
have done some serious
murder, serious as murder.
Serious crimes could be multiple robberies, which are pretty common, or crime where you actually took somebody's life. Most of the crimes that where they killed somebody or attempted murder are crimes of passion, and most of them are your girlfriend, your wife. What the police administration wants is a couple of things to allow an inmate to be transferred there. A lot of inmates want to go there because it's a national park. Because in the day they get to roam around the island and work, and they actually get to work, and they're amazing workers. I've never seen people work so hard. And the reason they work, I talk to them, it occupies their time. It makes them escape from their thoughts, and they feel like the work that they do on that island is essential work. They make the bread, they cook, they cultivate the land, they take care of farm animals, they repair roads, they're electricians. I mean, a lot of the problems of crime is you drift towards crime, and you drift because you don't find your identity and your place in society. But there, I think the experiment and the humane aspect of that detention is that inmates are given a purpose.
Da fuori, direttoso per vederla, perché ci siamo visti 30 anni fa, io stavo qua.
There's also a sense of respect on the part of, at least what we see in the film, on the part of the warden.
There's all the positive things we're talking about on the island. The huge negative thing of the island is that it's an island. And that it's isolated. The problem of being an inmate, of doing time, is that you are locked in, whether you're physically locked but you don't have to be locked in the island because the island is locked away because of its distance from the mainland. So it's a safe place to keep inmates. What they don't allow is anybody that has to do with organized crime, because organized crime could get them out very easily.
And that's what I was going to point, all of you make the point in the film that there is no connection at all to organized crime.
To mafia, camorra, or to people who have, dependency on drugs, who has major mental issues. They don't have the manpower to accommodate, special treatment,
special needs.
They want long sentences because if you go there only for a year, the administration believes you're not going to really get the benefits of this type of detention. But if you spend 7 or 8 years, this sense of validity and identity,
and hence redemption.
And that my work, my work is important, is meaningful, people depend on me, all that, so that you fit into a micro society, that you wouldn't have time to really experience that.
There are two moments that I think are really significant. One is this question of guilt and not guilt recognized. One guy says, they call me a murderer, but I'm not a murderer. You call me a murderer, whatever, and we get into that semantics, right? And then there's another one, which is, I think, more passionate. It is, I don't know if, I can't remember now if it's Antonio, the son of Vincenzo, but at one point he says, when I was 13, I worked in a bakery. I was working really hard. Then I didn't have anything, but then I see these kids running around with their mopeds and their cars and their good, nice clothes, et cetera, and here I'm. And then he started, I think he was the one who was breaking into ATMs and banks and things like that, right? Also that sense of realizing that what he did was not good but he realized the temptation of why he did it.
Well, I mean, it depends where you grow up. The crime, it's normalized. They all talk about the fact that when you first do, the first time, like any first time, is very nerve-wracking. And then that becomes normalized.
So there was another little conversation that I think speaks to a type of rehabilitation. And it was when there are three guys, one's an African and two Italians, and they're talking about polygamy.
Scusa, se tu c'hai tre donne, no? La sera ti addormenti con tutte e tre insieme.
Ci tablò allora.
Ci capito. Ogni sera sceglie uno, come funziona? Fammi capire.
Una settimana di...
You know, I laughed about it, but then afterwards I thought, well, this is sort of a little bit of a cultural exchange here of information.
You know, it's interesting because that's the feeling that I had. You know, I worked for many years for the UN as a consultant and doing videography for them.
Yeah.
So I spent a lot of time in the building there. And when you're there, you know, you're walking the elevator, there's like 18 languages being spoken.
Yeah.
And in a way, Gorgona is a version of that, you know, a very different, you know, but it's very interesting.
Yeah.
So I spent so much time there, you know, shooting this film, and I kept on returning because I wasn't getting enough of what I knew I needed to make the film. The great thing of Gorgona is the surroundings, the freedom that you have in the context.
And right, you don't get caught up into a little criminal system within the regular prison.
There's a lot less
Yeah,
of
a lot
that. But
le-
the negative is that you actually isolated.
Siccome sta agita oggi, ora stanno davanti perché già sono scisero race, vi devo prendere con tutta l'attrezzatura e portarvi dal castello e andare giù. Poi, sia voi che tutti quelli che sono qua.
So let's say your family member wants to come visit you. Unless they live in Livorno, very few of them
Yeah.
do, because Livorno is
The
town,
port that's closest,
that,
yeah.
that is connected. It's the only port connected to Gorgona. Unless your family lives there. Let's say they live in Naples, so they have to take a
get caught
train.
up.
They have to spend one night, the night before, because the motovedetta leaves at 7 a.m.
Okay.
for the visiting. It's a Saturday. And so you take the train, there's an expense. You usually come with family friend, you know, 2 or 3 people, so that's 3 trains.
Yeah.
At one hotel room, you can all sleep there, but you know, again, you have to eat. So now you're looking at your bills going up, right? You arrive in the morning, they don't tell you until 6:55 a.m. if the motovedetta is going. A lot of times they don't go.
Because of the sea, because of the high sea, or?
Yes, the excuse is the high sea, but you know, these days the previsions of weather, it's pretty accurate.
Yeah.
The truth is, a lot of I'm not accusing, but a lot of the people who drive the motovedetta, they're like, we don't have to bring them because, you know, we're not the taxis of the family members
Yeah.
of criminal. They have a little bit of that, you know. The little excuse they can, they don't leave. So then the isolation gets pretty extreme there. So a lot of people spend 3-4 years and then they kind of want to go back closer, especially when their sentence is ending. They are thinking, I don't have to spend my whole life in prison. If I had to spend my whole life in prison, probably Gorgona would be a good call.
Yeah.
But if I have to reintegrate, I want to be closer to my family. The other problem is the idea of reintegration is you need a job to function. Otherwise, you're going to go back to crime.
Yeah.
And in order to get how do you get a job if you're in prison in Gorgona? You can only work for Frescobaldi or work for the prison. Then it becomes like, how do you prove yourself into the workforce, you know, to the people that could hire you if you're in Gorgona?
Yeah.
Like everything in life, I think. It's never, oh, it's amazing. It's amazing, it's beautiful, but what's the big problem here?
Yeah.
And the big problem is what allows it to be great. They can have that freedom because they're isolated.
When you filmed this back in 2017,
I started in 17 and I ended just before COVID.
okay, so there was one local resident who was not a prisoner. And
Yes,
her name is
Luisa. She's,
Luisa
Citti.
Luisa Citti. And there was a moment, in fact, where she's at a cemetery, and I noticed that there was one date that went back to 1809 or something like that. So well before the unification of Italy, well before this place existed. What happened to all the other people?
So what happened is that in the 19th century, early 19th century, there was an effort to repopulate the island so they gave incentives, and 7 families took on this incentive, one of which was the Citti, which is Luisa's family. They basically resettled, like you would move west if you're in America, big incentives, And so they, and then they opened, because there used to be a monastery there.
And is that the prison, the monastery?
No, it's a different building. It's a different building. But in 1869, then they opened the prison. The island had been repopulated and by these 7 families. And so the great-grandparents of Luisa were living there. There were kids, there were schools, there were trattoria. So that little village that you see that now is a ghost village used to actually be inhabited by people year-round.
Yeah.
What happened was that in the late 60s, 1960s, everything changed in Italy, with, basically the boom, the Italian boom, and the fact that everybody started having cars. So people moved out of the countryside in Italy to the cities, and the islands were depopulated because people didn't want to be in the islands anymore. I actually made a film about Luisa because her story is so fascinating that she decided, she was born on the island, and when she got married at 16 with a person who was in the military, who was a bit older than her, who was stationed on the island with the military. They fell in love, they got married. He was from Florence, they moved to Florence, they had 2 kids, and then he passed away. Not that he was probably late 60s, early 70s. She was a young woman. She was in her late 40s, early 50s, and she decided to move back to Gorgona and spent 40 years on the island living by herself. She's pretty famous. Everybody who went by the island would stop by her to visit her, seeing that she politicians. She was friends with Bocelli. I mean, everybody who came, Matt Dillon came and met her. So now I just completed a film that is called Senza il mare non respiro, which means without the sea, I can't breathe.
You said you were doing a trilogy.
Yes, the 3rd one is about the father and son.
Okay, Vincenzo and
Palumbo, and they are from Torre del Greco, which is a suburb of Naples.
Yeah.
And they were together in Gorgona. That's where I met them.
Yeah, which is sort of uncanny. Right, that the father, I mean, we hear stories about that all over, that a father and son end up in the same prison, whatever, but in this case, it's even more uncanny because they do have that sense of freedom to go out and work, whatever, and they can do things that are not just sitting in
the
a
interesting
cell.
thing about, about Vincenzo and Antonio. Vincenzo is the son. I always say his name first because Vincenzo is kind of the guide of that family. Although he was in prison at 19, he actually he has a degree in economics, hotel school,
hospitality.
He works now in Sardinia as the cook, the main cook of all the restaurants where he's hired. He's very desirable, very hardworking.
Mi è rimasta questa immagine quando sono andato a salutarla in cucina, che quasi quasi mi metteva pure a piangere mio padre perché comunque era dispiaciuto. Sono partito con questa sua immagine di dispiacere.
Vincenzo got in trouble, but he's determined not to get into trouble. Just to really says, I have to. I don't have much time left. He's 45, so I have to really work and make, talk always about money. Money is very important. I have to make money. The father is kind of, trying to, but doesn't quite understand how important it is. That they don't get into trouble again.
So that's a 3rd installment.
This would be, this is the 3rd one, which will be finished in a year because I filmed most of it, but I need the epilogue because the epilogue is when both of their sentences have been completed.
The one on Luisa, have you finished that one?
Yes, I'm doing the music and the sound design. So I'm not going to reveal too many things about Luisa because there is a lot of very deep, powerful emotional reasons.
But how old is she when we see her?
She's 94.
Wow, she didn't look that old.
I know. She has the most amazing skin. Yeah. She's totally there together, So she's, it was very healthy for her to be on that island.
Wow.
Yeah.
Has anyone within the American penitentiary system seen this film and you know?
I mean, I have tried to screen it. It's here's the thing: to make a movie, it's a tremendous amount of effort,
Right.
And especially these type films that are shot within.
But you got a lot of support for this film, I noticed at the end. Which was really good.
But that's also because it was filmed in the course of 3.5 years, and then it was edited also because of COVID in the course of 1.5 years. But I shot 390 hours of material.
Wow.
So to cut that, I had to find this editor, Valentina, in Milan, who really she started looking and just loved the projects, but it's a lot of work. So what I'm saying is that by the time I got to the finish line and I finished the film, and we went to Festival dei Popoli, we won that festival, we did very well with the film.
Festival dei Popoli is a documentary film festival in Florence that's 60 years old.
It's the oldest documentary film festival in Europe.
Yeah.
And it's the most, I guess, the most prestigious
It is.
in Italy.
Yep,
it's
the
a
most
very
prestigious. You can say that. Yes.
And so we did very well there. Then I found a distributor in Italy. In Italy, we did what you're saying. I brought it. We did like event screenings. So I would accompagnare il film. I would like hold the film's hand and bring it to venues, whether they were in prison, in universities, in movie theaters, in sometimes small towns in Italy. I screened it a little bit in the US, but mainly in universities, in places like this. What I like about filmmaking is the process of making the movies. Releasing them, I do it because I have to, but honestly, I feel like I'd love to hand it over to somebody, but then there's nobody who takes it,
Yeah.
So I try and do some.
We have the second installment to look forward to, and then the third of the trilogy on Luisa. Well, listen, Antonio, thank you for coming by, taking time out of your day.
Thank you very much.
And we'll talk soon.
Thank you very much. Yep.
Thank you for watching this episode of Italics. I'm Anthony Tamburri. Arrivederci alla prossima puntata.